Ladies and gentlemen, you are not ready for what went down in that courtroom. The gavel hadn't even hit the wood when whispers began, and by the time the last verdict was announced, jaws were gaping on the floor. Janelle Brown, the erstwhile quiet peacekeeper of the sister wives family, had just blown the top off a scandal that even reality TV couldn't manufacture. $132,000 in contested funds, a raging confrontation with Robyn, and a shocked Kody Brown in the middle of it all. Imagine, the courthouse is abuzz, shoulder to shoulder filled with reporters, fans, and interested bystanders. There's tension in the air so thick, you could cut it like cake. Robyn goes in first, slick hair, impeccably tailored ensemble, attempting to emanate calm. But if you looked closely enough, you'd notice the nervous twitch in her eyes. Right behind her, Kody enters, that familiar resolute step, but today he's more subdued than normal. And then, Janelle, steady, unflappable, almost regal in attitude, as if she knows she's got the winning hand. For months, the rumors had been circulating: missing money, unexplained expenses, and finger-pointing behind closed doors. It was the type of drama Sister Wives viewers loved, except it wasn't happening in a living room or a family picnic. This was a court fight, and the stakes were real. The first hour is pure legal procedure. Lawyers rustle papers, the judge scans documents, and Robyn sits expressionless. Kody hunches over her, whispering occasionally, but his eyes are constantly glancing over at Janelle, as if he's searching for her next move. Janelle herself doesn't say much. Not yet. She's holding back. And oh, when she delivers it, it's like a bombshell. Janelle's lawyer approaches the bench, arms loaded with bank statements, receipts, and highlighted lists of transactions. He begins to lay them out, one at a time, as if constructing a wall between Janelle and the rest of the Browns. The judge leans in, reading the documents, and then the lawyer says it. The figure that will make waves throughout the room. $132,000. The air is instantly different. You can hear the mass gasp. They are staring at one another, mouths agape, as if they just heard the finish of the wildest film of the year. But this isn't a movie, this is real money, and it's supposedly connected to individual luxury purchases, vacations, and high-ticket items, all leading back to family accounts. Robyn's face goes deep red, and her eyes shoot to Kody. She mouths something, but her lawyer is quick to place a hand on her arm. Not now. Kody, for a rare moment, appears speechless. His brow creases, and he leans back in his chair, shaking his head as if he can't believe what he's witnessing. Then Janelle has a word, and the room is silent as a tomb. "It's not about the money," she says, her voice firm but edged. "It's about the betrayal. The trust we had as a family, it's over. And I'm not going to sit by and let all that we worked so hard for be taken away." After this point, the whole trial changes. This is not merely about figures on paper, it's about integrity, about shattered promises, about years of sacrifice that suddenly feel wasted. The attorneys exchange barbs back and forth, each side giving their account. Robyn's defense argues she is misunderstood, that the transactions were on the up and up, tied to family costs. But Janelle's lawyers are prepared, responding with receipts, dates, and even witness statements that contradict. Hours go by. Each new piece of information seems like a further twist in a show that just keeps getting better than itself. One witness mentions seeing large purchases that didn't fit the family's negotiated budget, and the gallery gasps in shock. The judge raises an eyebrow, obviously taking it all in. At last, after what seems like forever, the judge leans forward. The courtroom is so silent, you could hear a pin drop. His voice is serene, but contains a weight that everyone senses. He decides in Janelle's favor. Robyn has to repay the entire $132,000. The response is immediate. Janelle doesn't smile, doesn't rub it in. She simply closes her eyes for a split second, as if allowing the relief to wash over her. Robyn's eyes fill with tears, but she hastily turns away from the cameras. Kody just looks like someone took the air out of him. He stares at the judge a beat too long, as if thinking he must have heard that wrong. But there isn't any mistake. The gavel falls. And that's it. Or so says the court. Out there it's a whole different war zone. The moment the second Janelle steps onto the courthouse steps, she is confronted with a sea of cameras and microphones. Journalists scream out questions. Fans shriek her name. Flashes pop every second. She breathes in and says only one thing. This wasn't about revenge. It was about doing the right thing. And with that she turns and walks away, head held high. Robyn arrives a few minutes afterward, surrounded by her lawyer and Kody. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't even look anyone in the eye. Kody attempts to protect her from the chaos. But the media will not be swayed. One shouts out, "Robyn, did you steal the money?" Another one asks Kody how this will impact the family. Kody snarks, "No comment," before rushing Robyn into a waiting SUV. Before the video makes it to social media, the internet is ablaze. Videos of Janelle's unruffled demeanor in court go viral. The term 132K is used as a popular hashtag. Memes are swirling on Twitter, and TikTok edits appear hours later. And fan accounts begin making side-by-side comparisons of Janelle and Robyn throughout the trial. The fan base divides itself into camps nearly immediately. Team Janelle supporters applaud her courage, claiming she's finally standing up for a lifetime of being pushed aside. Robyn's defenders claim the trial was exaggerated, saying the family situation is much more complex than the public knows. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict is just as definitive as it was by the judge, and Janelle's emerging victorious. Behind closed doors, however, the harm is irreparable. Insiders close to the Browns rumor that the relationships are beyond repair. Kody's trust for Janelle has been replaced by silent resentment, whereas Robyn is humiliated, both publicly and in private. Even some of the other family members are apparently taking sides, tearing the family apart and rendering earlier disagreements minor. This wasn't a money fight. This was the culmination of years of tension, power plays, and unspoken resentments finally coming to a head in the most public manner possible. And although the case in court may be closed, the fallout is just getting started. As the dust settles, one thing is clear. The sister wives saga has turned the corner of no return. The family that once boasted of unity, no matter how unorthodox, is now divided, their personal scars exposed for the world to witness. And sitting at the center of it all is a figure that will stick in their heads for years to come. $132,000. If you think this is where the story ends, well, think again. Because on reality TV, and in real life, a verdict never tells the whole story. It's merely the beginning of the next chapter. The second you walked into that courtroom, you could sense it. The atmosphere was charged, dense, almost vibrating with tension. It wasn't any old day in court. It was the day. The one that had been speculated about for weeks, teased in online fan communities, hinted at in vague Instagram posts. This wasn't some everyday legal proceeding. This was the ultimate public showdown between years of Janelle Brown and Robyn Brown tension. Reporters were already standing in line at the door when it opened, cameras around their necks, eyes fixed on the entrance for the first glimpse of the participants in this real-life drama. Sister Wives fans had driven hours to be here, some holding coffee cups, others with phones at the ready to stream live reports to their fans. The crowd was not unruly, but there was an excitement, the sort you feel when waiting for a large concert, where everyone knows that something big is going to occur. Inside the room was raw drama. Polished wood benches graced the gallery, the judge's bench at the far end aglow in sunlight streaming in through tall windows. Every groan of the floorboards sounded more than it should have. Every rustle of papers from the clerk's desk sounded like a drumbeat. Next came the moment everyone had waited for. The entrance. Robyn was first. She strode swiftly, head held high, her black blazer zipped tightly over a cream-colored blouse. If you took only one look at her ensemble, you'd assume she was immovable. But if for an instant you caught her eyes, you noticed it. A flash of apprehension. She gripped her handbag a bit too tightly, moved a little too quickly, as if she was striding into a storm she wanted to escape. Kody kept pace behind her, his jaw clenched, his characteristic mane of hair outlining a face that wasn't concealing its tension. He did not glance left or right, did not nod to the reporters who had slipped into the gallery, did not wave at the fans in the rear. His gaze was forward, laser-locked on the defense table where Robyn's lawyer already sat. He nodded slightly to Robyn, before sliding into the seat beside her, leaning forward to whisper something that caused her to nod without glancing at him. And then, Janelle. If Robyn walked in looking like she was expecting to hit something, Janelle walked in, looking like she was about to do the hitting. She had on a navy suit jacket over a white blouse, her blonde hair pulled tightly back. No chunky purse, no sheaf of documents clutched in her hand, just a thin folder, and an attitude that spoke volumes. Her heels clicked on the shiny floor with every step, the sound clean and sharp. She wasn't hurrying, she wasn't looking around the room. She was walking like a woman who had already made up her mind that she'd win. The second she sat down at her table, she didn't look at Robyn or Kody. She didn't have to. She put down her folder, sat and laced her fingers in front of her. The way she sat, straight-backed, chin slightly raised, indicated she wasn't here to bargain. The judge arrived, and the court stood up. As everyone resumed their seats, the room coalesced into a nearly unsettling silence. It was as if the walls themselves were aware that they would soon be a part of history being made. The hearing started with the clerk calling out the case number, the names of the parties, and the grounds for the hearing. It was so clinical, so boring, compared to what they all knew this actually was. A family civil war forced into the light. But the serenity was short-lived. Not even 10 minutes into the proceedings, Janelle's lawyer stood and approached the judge's bench with a thick sheaf of papers clutched in his hands. He didn't hurry. He moved deliberately, allowing the clinking of the pages onto the desk to make the room heavy with something all their own. The judge pushed up his glasses, peering down at the top sheet. The lawyer started talking in a tight but relaxed tone, the voice that is telling you they have done their research and are keeping an ace up their sleeve. Your Honor, he stated, what we have here is a string of transactions which cannot be dismissed. They amount to $132,000, and all of them traced back to funds that were to be utilized in the interest of the entire family, not for individual opulence. That was when it happened. The gasp. It wasn't one individual. It was nearly everyone. Heads spun Robyn's way. A hum passed through the gallery, before order was restored by the judge banging his gavel. Robyn's gaze shot to Kody and back to the table. She pursed her lips, her knuckles tight as she gripped the arm of her chair. Kody's forehead creased so severely it seemed it could remain like that for eternity. His eyes darted to Janelle, but she did not glance back. She was looking forward at the judge, her expression impassive. The lawyer kept going, sliding one marked page after another in front of the judge. Each contained dates, figures, and short descriptions. Purchases of jewelry, expensive furniture, airline flights, spa treatments. The figures mounted like a chorus in a symphony, and by the time the final page landed on the desk, the figure was seared into everyone's brain. $132,000. Janelle's face did not alter, but you could detect a slight lift of her chin, as if she was mouthing silently. See? This is what I've been saying. Robyn's lawyer jumped up to defend him, his words a little too rapid, as if he were beating out the flames before they engulfed everything. He talked of miscommunications, of family decisions made together, of bills split that perhaps were misinterpreted. But no amount of fast talking could eliminate the vision of that thick stack of statements on the judge's table. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled together, eyes shifting from one end of the courtroom to the other. The gravity of the charge wasn't legal alone. It was personal. This wasn't a stranger being charged with misuse of funds. This was a sister wife. A person who had been a part of a tightly controlled public image of cooperation and harmony. And sitting there between the two of them was Kody, his silence more significant than anything else in the room. His eyes were weighted, his body stiff. Whatever was going through his mind, it wasn't something he could vocalize. From the gallery it was whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." They were right. This was not about money. This was about loyalty, trust, years of uncomplained grievances, suddenly bursting into the open like a tidal wave. And when the judge requested a brief recess, individuals began whispering among themselves, their gazes shooting over to the three individuals in the middle of it. Janelle leaned forward over to her attorney, her ears perked up. Robyn remained frozen, her gaze fixed upon the tabletop. Kody rubbed his temples, as if hoping the whole morning could be erased. Nobody really knew how the day would finish. But this was certain: the first shots had been fired, and the reverberations of that $132,000 bombshell would ring out long after the gavel fell. If Section 1 was the blast, Section 2 was the lingering, heightened anticipation before it exploded. The courtroom was not a mere court of law that day. It was a stage for a climax years in the making. The courtroom was packed, every eyeball staring straight ahead, every intake of breath seeming to suspend in midair. To outsiders, it may have appeared like any other case on the bench. Shiny wood benches, vaulted ceilings with brass chandeliers, the flag proudly standing alongside the judge's bench. But to anyone who had been following the sister wives drama, the atmosphere in that room seemed different. It wasn't all about law and order. This was all about loyalty, betrayal, and a family disintegrating before your very eyes. The gallery was an odd combination. To one side were journalists with legal pads and tape recorders, poised to catch every look and whisper. They'd prepared, some rummaging through manila folders packed with printed screenshots of scenes from past episodes and tabloid headlines. Behind them were the superfans, people who'd watched the Browns for over a decade, who could recite arguments from season 6 word for word, who'd analyzed every body language cue from every tell-all interview. Some wore sister wives merch. Others clutched coffee like it was life support. They weren't here just for gossip. They were here because, in a way, they felt invested in this family's story. There were also some familiar faces that lent the air an added tension. Cousins and friends of the family who were privy to all the goings-on behind closed doors, but had yet to speak publicly. They did not show for the cameras. They showed for justice to lean one way or the other. Robyn showed up with a choreographed air of calm. The courthouse hallway had been a gauntlet of flashbulbs and yelled questions, but she kept her eyes fixed on the distance. The click of her heels rhythmic on the linoleum. Her cream blouse and black blazer were immaculate. Her makeup subtle but perfect. Her hair cascading smoothly over her shoulders. At a distance, she seemed a woman in command, but close up there were giveaways. Her left hand, which gripped the handle of her bag, clamped and released every couple of seconds. Her lips drew together a fraction too tightly when journalists shouted out her name. When she entered the courtroom, her eyes performed a rapid scan of the room, the gallery, the judge, the prosecutor's table. And then Janelle, already in place, was flipping through papers with her attorney. They exchanged a brief glance. It wasn't a glare, not exactly, but there was nothing warm in it. Robyn turned quickly to her lawyer, hissed something in his ear, and sat down. Kody trailed behind Robyn. The TV-ready charm that normally accompanied him was absent. Gone were the confident smile, the larger-than-life energy. Instead, he sat with the stiff-backed air of a man who realized he couldn't manage this. He gave Robyn a swift nod as he sat down beside her, but continued to steal furtive glances in the direction of Janelle, as if quietly attempting to determine just how hostile she was going to be. He leaned over at one point and whispered something in Robyn's ear. Her head dipped in the slightest of nods, but her gaze remained glued on her attorney's papers. To the fans in the gallery, this was surreal. The man who had once been the centerpiece of their family dynamic was now just there, caught between two women whose relationship had gone far beyond strained. Janelle's presence was a stark contrast to the tension vibrating off Robyn and Kody. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly in front of her, a small folder of documents by her side. Her attire was minimalist, but crisp, a navy blazer over a stiff blouse, black slacks and discreet jewelry. She wasn't scrolling her phone. She wasn't glancing about the room for supporters. She was merely waiting. Occasionally her attorney leaned in to clarify something, and she nodded once, her gaze intent, her lips drawing into a thin line of resolve. She exuded the sort of energy that declared, "I didn't do this to gain sympathy. I did it to win." Strictly from the very first second, the bailiff called the room to order. There was a charge in the air, the sort of charge that makes the hair on your arms rise. People leaned forward, some half holding their breath and not even knowing it. You could have sworn you could feel the rhythm of the room's heartbeat, heavy and slow. Even the faintest noises, a creak of the chair, a pen's soft click, seemed louder. The judge rustled his papers. The clerk pushed up her glasses. A fan somewhere in the gallery spilled their pen, and the resultant noise caused at least 3 individuals to start. This was not the pandemonium of a shouting contest. This was the pinpoint silence of individuals waiting for one to take the first step. The first few minutes were formalities, case numbers, legalities, introductions. But the tension made them seem more important than they actually were. When the clerk announced the official cause for the hearing, a shudder of whispers swept through the gallery. The bailiff had to call for order twice before it settled. Robyn's attorney started out establishing the incident as a misunderstanding, a private family affair that had unfortunately snowballed. He talked smoothly and cautiously, looking over at the judge with a practiced combination of deference and import. Janelle's attorney remained seated across the aisle, taking notes, occasionally underlining on his legal pad. He did not interrupt. He did not object. He waited, and that silence was more disturbing than any fight. Even prior to the evidence being released, body language between the 3 key players spoke volumes. Robyn's shoulders remained tense, edged slightly in Kody's direction. Kody, on his part, kept shifting from leaning in over Robyn to sitting back in his chair, hands clasped. Janelle, however, continued to face forward, practically disregarding their presence. She wasn't there to talk to them. She was there to talk to the court. And because she never even looked in their direction, it seemed as though she'd already distanced herself from family unity. Even prior to the evidence being revealed, body language among the 3 principals spoke volumes. Robyn's shoulders remained tense, slightly leaning toward Kody. Kody himself alternated between leaning forward toward Robyn and sitting back in his chair, fingers laced together. However, Janelle faced forward, almost as if she was ignoring their existence. She was there to speak to the court, not them. And when she never even glanced at their direction, it seemed as if she had separated herself from the concept of family unity long ago. As the attorneys performed their opening dance, the gallery murmured, softly but incessantly. There were fans guessing what form of evidence Janelle possessed. Some insisted they'd viewed screenshots of bank transfers being shared on the internet. Others mused about mystery witnesses who were said to be prepared to give evidence. A back row fan grumbled, "If true, this has nothing to do with the money. It's about control." The person sitting next to them nodded, without breaking eye contact at the front of the room. By the time the initial rounds of back and forth had been completed, the entire room was tense. The judge leaned back in his seat, fingers steepled together, and nodded slightly to Janelle's lawyer. It was his turn. The gallery as a whole leaned forward, cameras at the ready, pens poised. This was it, the moment when the case would turn from strained quiet to a verbal blow. But Janelle's lawyer did not hurry. He strolled over to the bench, dumping a huge pile of papers down on the judge's bench. He did not even glance Robyn's way. He did not even glance Kody's way. He glanced once at Janelle, who nodded very slightly, and turned back to the judge. And in that instant, before even a single dollar figure was uttered, before any accusation was legally made, everyone understood the true battle was about to commence. The courtroom was already strained, but when Janelle's lawyer rose, it seemed that the tension turned from charged to perilous. You could sense it in the way individuals in the gallery moved forward on the benches, notebooks poised, phones deceptively tilted skyward to capture. The din of conversation that had existed up to the first hour, dead-ended like a mute button had been pressed. Every eye fell upon the man approaching the bench now. He wasn't holding a thin folder, a lone sheet of paper. He was holding a stack, thick, stacked, bound by 2 heavy clips. The heft of it was at once literal and symbolic. He reached the podium, placed the documents down, and pulled his tie tight. His voice was measured, deliberate, but every word struck with a quiet intensity. Your Honor, what you have before you is a complete record of transaction, each and every one of them back to family accounts. Accounts which, according to the family's own agreement, were to be for the use of all members, not for personal gain. Already Robyn's shoulders have tightened. Her right foot starts to bounce rhythmically under the table, a small movement, but one that gives away her nerves. Kody shoots her an anxious look, then at the attorney, his mouth set in a thin line. The lawyer turned to the first page, passing a copy to the judge while keeping one raised for the clerk of the court. The rustle of paper on wood was too loud. "This, Your Honor," he went on, "is the beginning of a pattern. A pattern that starts small but grows into something much more sinister." He read aloud the first few entries: home decor, clothing, and miscellaneous purchases. Initially, the figures weren't surprising. $320 here. $540 there. Then the numbers increased. Thousands for several at a time. Orders for high-end furniture. Airfare for 2 to a resort location. High-end jewelry. Spa treatments. Designer purses. The courtroom seemed smaller with each illustration. The gallery, which had been breathing so freely just a moment before, now hung suspended in its collective breath with each dollar figure. The tone of the attorney didn't shift, but his speech did, slow to begin with, then remorselessly faster, until the beat was almost hypnotic. He wasn't reciting figures. He was creating suspense, piling the evidence like bricks, until the wall of accusation and irrefutable fact stood over the room like a giant. Kody's demeanor shifted. He relaxed back in his chair, forward again, then back. His hand quoted his jaw. His eyes shied away from Janelle altogether. And every now and then, he glanced at the gallery, as if to check how people were taking it. Robyn's lawyer jotted down notes on a pad, leaning in at times to whisper to her. But Robyn wasn't responding to the whispers. She was sitting with her eyes fixed straight down on the table, blinking faster than normal. Then came the instant. The lawyer stopped, turned over the last sheet in his pile, and set it down flat on the podium. "When you add up these transactions, all of which, again, came from pooled family money, you get $132,000. The way he said it, each part spread out, each figure suspended in mid-air, made the number seem even larger. The gallery collectively gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God," a bit too loudly, before remembering themselves. Even the court reporter, normally an impassive figure, looked up for a moment, before returning to her typing. Robyn's complexion went bright red. Her pupils gripped a pen tightly enough that it appeared as though it might break. She looked at Kody, who at last looked back at her. But the moment was short and strained, as if neither could speak without complicating things. Janelle's face didn't really change, but there was a small adjustment. Her shoulders straightened a little bit more. Her chin lifted a half-inch. This wasn't the self-satisfied smile of a person enjoying revenge. It was quiet relief of a person who'd been sidelined for months, finally having evidence laid out for the world to see. She leaned forward a little to her lawyer, and although what they said was inaudible, her nod indicated he was presenting precisely the argument she wanted. The judge didn't respond theatrically, but the tightening around his eyes, and the slight dip of his mouth, spoke volumes. He flipped back through the pages, making the occasional note. Often too rapid in rising. Robyn's lawyer went to the podium. His tone was combative, but attempted to disguise itself as patient. "These expenditures, Your Honor, are not what they appear when removed from context. Most of them were family-related spending, verbally or indirectly, authorized by other family members." Those words out of context coursed through the courtroom like an electric current. Individuals fidgeted in their seats, looking about at one another knowingly. Robyn nodded weakly as her lawyer spoke, her hands now clasped tightly in front of her. Kody glared at the defense table, nodding intermittently, but his foot started tapping with restless rhythm against the floor. Janelle's attorney didn't interrupt. He simply stood, arms crossed, waiting for his turn to dismantle the counter-argument. And when it came, it was surgical. "Your Honor, context is exactly what we've provided. Dates, receipts, account origins, and patterns of spending that cannot be explained away as incidental or mutual. The documentation speaks for itself." He flipped back through a few pages, indicating entries in which big purchases were made on days when family members were not around, or in which cash was pulled out in amounts just under the reporting level, a point that elicited murmurs from the gallery. The more he testified, the more the emotional dynamic in the room began to shift. The first shock of the $132,000 figure was becoming a silent, seething incredulity that this had been able to happen, or not be noticed, all this time. All throughout, Kody's inner turmoil was etched on his face. He wasn't a defendant, but he was there. Each of the whispered asides, each of the sidelong glances between him and Robyn, each of the pointed lacks of acknowledgement toward Janelle. At some point, the lawyer's voice became muffled in the background, as Kody looked straight ahead, his eyes unfocused, as if he were going through a mental highlight reel of the last couple years, attempting to remember when things had begun to go wrong. And then it was Janelle's turn to have her say. She did not rise at first. She simply spoke from where she sat, her voice ringing out across the room without effort. "This isn't about the money," she told him. "It's about trust. When you've created a family, lived a life, given up things for one another, and then you learn something like this, it's not just figures on a sheet. It's a betrayal you feel every time you wake up, every time you look somebody in the eye." The room was silent. Not the respectful silence of court procedure, the heavy, collective silence of people realizing they were witnessing something irreversible. Even the judge slowed down as if hesitating before looking away from the papers again. By the time the lawyer was done, the amount of $132,000 was not just a figure anymore. It had substance. It had a story. It was a sign of years of unsettled tension and a breaking point that would alter the dynamics in that room forever. As the judge asked for a recess, Robyn sat for a full minute, gazing at the tabletop before rising slowly to her feet. Kody put his hand on her shoulder, but his gaze remained locked on the judge's bench. Janelle picked up her folder, said something quickly to her attorney, and sat back down, her face as calm as when she had entered. The bombshell had been detonated, and its reverberation would continue to resonate through that courthouse, and the Brown family, well beyond the day's events. The atmosphere within the courtroom was thick with tension for the first time ever. You could hear the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the rustling of papers on the lawyers' desks, and the occasional cough from the audience. Everyone in that room knew something was going to go down. Robyn sat at the defense table, her fingers wrapped so tightly around a pen that it seemed to be about to break. Her eyes flicked back and forth between her attorney and the judge, as though she searched for some unspoken assurance of reassurance. But the fact? There wasn't any. On the other side, Janelle leaned back in her chair, her face calm but her eyes laser-focused. She had been preparing for this moment for months, maybe even years, building her case brick by brick until it was impossible to ignore. And now, the final showdown was here. Kody sat back behind Robyn, arms crossed and jaw tight. You could almost see the frustration emanating from him. He had believed this case was going to be a sure thing for Robyn, perhaps even an opportunity to portray Janelle as overreacting. But as the hearing had progressed, step by step, Janelle's attorneys had taken apart Robyn's defenses like a house of cards. The judge's eyes narrowed. The judge pushed back his glasses and looked down at the pile of papers in front of him. "Before making my final decision," he said, "I would like to discuss the eye-catching discrepancies in the financial reports brought forth by the defense." A hush fell over the courtroom. Everyone knew what was next. He turned toward Robyn's table. "Mrs. Brown, your testimony claimed that the $132,000 in question was allocated for family expenses. However, upon review of your bank statements, credit card transactions, and the supplemental records provided by the plaintiff, it appears a significant portion of these funds were diverted to personal purchases that had nothing to do with the family trust." Janelle's attorney leaned forward with a faint smile, as if to say silently, "Gotcha." The judge proceeded, "This includes but is not limited to fine jewelry, luxury vacations, and significant down payments on homes only in your name." Robyn's face paled. The gallery gasped in unison. Kody fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair, gazing at the floor. Robyn, _ lawyer leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, if I may, these were misinterpreted purchases. My client thought," the judge interrupted him with a brusque gesture of his hand. "Counsel, your client's assumptions do not take precedence over the recorded facts. The figures do not deceive. This court is run on facts, not emotions." The room fell silent after the declaration. Robyn's lips quivered as she glanced at her papers, refusing to meet anyone's eye. The confident air she once exuded had given way to evident fear. The judge called Janelle to the witness stand for closing statements. She made her way slowly, step by deliberate step, as if moving toward the final page of an extended, draining fight. She stood before the court, not in rage, but determination. For years she started, her tone firm. I've worked to keep the peace, to trust the family setup we established. But peace without justice isn't peace, it's silence. And I won't be silent any longer. The funds in question were to be put toward the family trust, so that all of us could have some stability and security. Instead, it was diverted for egotistical reasons. This isn't about dollars. It's about betrayal. Her statements appeared to reverberate in the air. Even those who had attended in favor of Robyn couldn't suppress the impression made by what Janelle was speaking about. After Janelle retreated, the judge fiddled with his papers, heaved a deep breath, and addressed in a commanding tone. In consideration of the prevailing evidence before this court rules in favor of plaintiff Mrs. Janelle Brown. The entire amount of $132,000 is to be refunded to the family trust within 90 days. He sought will be subject to asset seizure and further penalties. The room was filled with murmurs. Robyn sat immobile, her expression a combination of shock and humiliation. Kody's eyes went wide, his hand covering his forehead in shock. But the judge wasn't done. Also, because of the willful misrepresentation of financial documents, the court is adding another $20,000 in punitive damages. This decision is final. Robyn finally spoke up, but it came out in a trembling whisper. This isn't fair. The judge's eyes were unforgiving. What is not equitable, Mrs. Brown, is taking things away from people that belong to them. This court does not condone lying. She slumped back in her chair, water beginning to form in her eyes. It was obvious this was not merely a loss at law. It was a public humiliation, and it would haunt her for many years. Behind her, Kody grumbled something to himself. His jaw clenched so tight that it appeared painful. He didn't say a word to Robyn, didn't attempt to comfort. The truth was sinking in. This decision had repercussions far deeper than finances. It had shattered the very foundation of his relationships. Janelle didn't smile, didn't gloat. She merely nodded at her attorney and packed up her things. As she walked away, she caught Robyn's eye momentarily. No words were spoken, but the statement was clear. This is what happens when the truth finally comes out. The cameras waiting outside the courthouse were ready. As Janelle walked down those steps, reporters shouted all sorts of questions. She offered only one line before getting in her car. Sometimes the only way to repair a broken system is to hold it up to the light. By the time word was out on the internet, social media had already gone up in flames. Hashtags #Janelle wins and #132K exposed trended within hours. Fans poured into comment streams with kudos for Janelle's bravery and demands for responsibility from Robyn and Kody. Within the Brown household, the repercussions were only just starting. Trust had been violated, allegiances shattered, and the pretenses they presented to the public had been blown wide apart. But for Janelle, this was not just a legal victory. It was a turning point on a personal level. A moment in which she demonstrated, finally and definitively, that fighting for what is right is worth all the battle wounds. The courtroom had plunged into a spooky silence when Judge Reynolds let the final judgment drop. The atmosphere was thick, like the walls themselves sensed that nothing in the world of sister wives would ever be the same again. The $132,000 controversy had been resolved, but the reputational and emotional damage was only just starting. What followed was not only a legal decision, it was the public dissolution of Kody Brown's tenuous empire. The words of the judge still rang in their ears. Mrs. Brown, you are entitled to the full $132,000, to be paid within 60 days. Janelle, who sat upright and steadfast, merely nodded, but in her eyes, a flash of something more, vindication appeared. She had been struggling not only for the money, but for the principle, for the years of being pushed aside, manipulated and treated as a lesser player in her marriage. Robyn, however, sat rigid as a statue. The woman who had walked into court sporting a neatly honed veneer of saccharine innocence now resembled someone who had just been struck by a freight train. Her lawyers were speaking quietly in her ear, no doubt telling her they'd appeal. But even they could see the judge's decision was watertight. And then there was Kody, the self-anointed patriarch of the Brown family, the man who had spent years positioning himself as the glue that kept his polygamy marriage intact, sat with his hands gripped tightly together, his knuckles white. The shock on his face wasn't purely about money. This was about control. Control that had just slipped away from him. In hours, news outlets picked up the story. TMZ, People, and all major entertainment blogs had headlines shouting Janelle Brown wins big in court against Robyn. Judge orders $132K payment. Sister wives bombshell. Kody speechless, as Robyn loses legal battle. Social media blew up. Trends on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok included hashtags such as #JusticeForJanelle, #Robyn exposed and #Kody speechless. Footage of the court proceedings was being shared around, with millions watching again and again, as Judge Reynolds handed down the verdict. Fans were analyzing every micro-expression, every hushed word between Kody and Robyn. The Brown family's fan base was split. Some fiercely defended Robyn, insisting she was the victim of a smear campaign. But the majority, they were celebrating Janelle's victory like it was their own. Memes flooded the internet, showing Janelle with a crown and captions like Queen of the Courtroom. If the public thought the drama ended in the courtroom, they were wrong. According to sources close to the Browns, the aftermath was brutal. That evening, Kody, Robyn and their lawyers had an intense meeting at Robyn's residence. Witnesses said the fight could be heard from outside the street. "You let her win," Kody supposedly spat, pacing the living room like a rabid animal. Robyn, also crying, retorted, "This wasn't my fault. You told me to shut up and let the lawyers deal with it." Their arguments increased in volume, accusations and recriminations trading back and forth. Robyn blamed Kody for not being supportive enough of her in public during the trial, and Kody blamed Robyn for mismanaging the finances that got them into the legal situation in the first place. And Janelle celebrated in private, not with champagne and a camera crew, but with her kids. They all sat down to a little dinner at her house. Laughter rang out in the room, a far cry from the chaos that was unfolding at Robyn's home. For the first time in years, Janelle was finally free. She had held her ground and emerged victorious, not only in court, but in the restoration of her dignity. The decision wasn't only an emotional setback, it was a monetary one. Forking out $132,000 wasn't petty cash for Robyn and Kody, particularly with their already depleted finances. Sources reported that they were frantically trying to determine how to raise the cash. Would they sell a piece of property, dip into family funds, take out another loan? Each had its own risks attached, and none of them were positive. Speculation was rampant that TLC producers were secretly weighing a show twist for next season of Sister Wives, with an intense focus on the trial and its aftermath. Even some insiders hinted that Janelle's victory could pave the way for her very own spin-off show, independent of Kody's shadow. Just when all the drama seemed to be wrapping up, a new twist burst into the scene. A leaked email, purportedly written by Kody to his lawyers, appeared on the internet. In it, Kody appeared to imply that he had known about the money problem well before it was an issue in court, but did nothing about it because he said, "It will blow over, and Janelle doesn't have the guts to take this to court." The leak was catastrophic for Kody's reputation. Already critical fans now viewed him as controlling, but now they saw him also as reckless. The story changed. This wasn't merely Robyn losing in court. This was about Kody underestimating Janelle and being burned. When reporters approached Kody to discuss the leak, he would not comment, grumbling something about fake news before stalking away. But the harm had been done. The narrative was all over the place, and public opinion already had its verdict. In one of the season finale's most buzzed about moments, cameras spotted Janelle exiting her attorney's office, head held high, the sun shining on her just so. She didn't gloat, didn't throw shade, didn't even say Kody or Robyn's names. She just told the press, "I fought for what was mine. I fought for fairness, and I would do it again." Those few words were made iconic, repeated in innumerable TikToks, spliced with messages of women's empowerment for those who had been ignored or belittled. And what about Kody and Robyn? Their formerly carefully constructed image as the ideal plural marriage couple had been disrupted. TLC executives already were discussing whether the network should distance itself from them, or go for the controversy gold. There was one thing that was clear. Janelle's win wasn't purely a legal victory. It was a cultural phenomenon. It was evidence that in the court of law, and in the court of public opinion, the truth still had a fighting chance. And for Kody Brown, the man who had believed he could dictate the narrative, the wake-up call was harsh. The empire he had constructed wasn't just beginning to crumble, it was imploding.